Ladies and gentlemen, are you tired of feeling guilty for focusing on your own growth, peace, or purpose? Do you ever feel like you're being called selfish just for wanting to prioritize your healing, your vision, or your calling? In this message, we're going to break the chains of people-pleasing and false humility. You're not selfish, you're finally waking up. And today I'm going to show you why focusing on you is the most responsible and spiritual decision you can ever make. They told you to shrink. They told you to be humble. They told you to stay quiet, play small, and always put others before yourself, even if it killed your joy, even if it dimmed your light. And somewhere along the way, you confused sacrifice with self-erasure. You were never selfish for wanting peace. You were never arrogant for wanting clarity. You were never rebellious for desiring purpose. You were simply waking up. And today, the alarm clock is ringing louder than ever, not outside, but inside of you. It's time to focus on you. Asterisk, when a child is born, there is no confusion in that child's spirit. The child does not second-guess their existence, their worth, or their right to dream. A child can imagine they're a king or a queen without needing a crown. A child can see themselves soaring through the skies or healing the world and never once pause to consider how realistic that sounds. That's not fantasy, that's raw identity before it's filtered through fear. That's who you were before you were told who to be. But as we grow, the voices around us begin to write over. The voice within us, parents, teachers, religious institutions, culture, tradition, none of them are inherently evil, but many of them are unaware. Unaware that in trying to mold us, they sometimes suffocate us. Unaware that in pushing us to meet certain expectations, they are slowly stripping away the layers of our authenticity. And over time, you forget what your own voice even sounded like before the world began echoing its demands inside your soul. We are raised to prioritize compliance over clarity. You are applauded when you behave, when you perform, when you fit the mold, but what happens when your truth doesn't fit inside their box? What happens when your design doesn't align with their demands? Most people don't ask those questions because asking them makes you different. And being different is dangerous in a world where sameness is rewarded. So instead of challenging the system, we shrink to fit it. We trade boldness for acceptance. We exchange authenticity for applause. The result? You become a stranger to yourself. You know how to impress others, but you no longer know how to inspire yourself. You've mastered the art of performance, but you've forgotten how to be present. You've built an image, but lost the person beneath it. And when that happens, life becomes heavy, not because you are tired, but because the weight of pretending is heavier than the weight of becoming. Some people spend decades living lives that were never theirs to live. They go into careers that make their family proud, but leave their soul empty. They marry people who look good on paper, but feel wrong in purpose. They serve in churches, organizations, or systems that applaud their labor but never feed their calling. Why? Because from a young age they were taught to be everything except themselves. You were born with a blueprint, a divine pattern coded into your very being. But when that design is buried beneath layers of human opinion, you start to malfunction spiritually. You go through the motions, but something inside of you keeps whispering, this isn't it. That whisper isn't rebellion, it's remembrance. It's your true self trying to find its way back to the surface. It's not selfishness. It's spiritual intelligence waking up from a deep sleep. Many of us think we are dealing with depression, confusion, or anxiety when what we're actually facing is identity dislocation. Your soul is in conflict because it remembers who you were before compromise stepped in. It remembers the dreams you used to have before doubt built a prison around them. It remembers the courage you once carried before disappointment broke your spirit. The truth is, you don't need to be fixed, you need to be found. The real you is still in there, buried beneath all the things you thought you had to become. In order to be accepted, this is why people-pleasing is so dangerous. Not just because it exhausts you, but because it erases you. Every time you say yes to what violates your inner knowing, you silence the original voice within. Every time you betray your instinct to preserve someone else's comfort, you chip away at the integrity of your own design. And eventually you wake up wondering why you feel lost even though you did everything right. You followed the rules, kept the peace, played your part, stayed in line, but you also lost yourself along the way. You were never designed to live according to expectation. You were designed to live according to intention. Expectations are external, but intention is internal. Expectations are the world's way of shaping you, but intention is heaven's way of defining you. Until you return to the original intention behind your creation, you will always feel out of place even when everyone around you is clapping. When identity is buried, performance becomes the substitute for purpose. You begin to live to be seen, rather than live to be whole. You confuse visibility with value. You measure your worth by your ability to be useful to others, not by your alignment with what you were born to do. But usefulness without authenticity is a tragedy in slow motion. You can be celebrated and still be suffocating. You can be needed and still be nameless to your own soul. The tragedy of living for expectations is that they never stop moving. The moment you meet one, another is added. And so your peace becomes conditional, your self-worth becomes a moving target. And you begin to live not from vision, but from survival. You play roles, you master routines, you make everyone happy except yourself. Because underneath the applause is an identity screaming for resurrection. This is why silence, solitude, and stillness are not luxuries, they are necessities. You cannot rediscover who you are in the noise of opinions. You cannot reconnect to your origin if you never disconnect from the false scripts. The process of waking up to your identity requires stripping away, not adding on. It requires courage to disappoint the crowd so you can honor the calling. It requires asking hard questions that may make others uncomfortable but will finally make you whole. True transformation begins with confrontation, not of the world, but of yourself. You must be willing to admit that much of what you've built may have been rooted in fear. You must be willing to challenge the version of you that was manufactured by survival. You must be willing to go deeper than behavior and uncover belief. Systems that taught you it was dangerous to be fully alive. Because the real war is not around you, it's within you. And that war ends the moment you decide to stop living by the identity the world gave you, and start becoming the person you were before you were ever broken by it. Asterisk, there is a divine order in all of creation. Nothing God created was designed without a purpose. The tree was made to give shade, oxygen, and fruit. The stars were made to govern the night and speak signs to the heavens. The seed was made to die so that it could multiply. Every single thing in nature has a purpose, and so do you. But while everything else in creation functions freely according to its purpose, humanity struggles. Not because we don't have purpose, but because we've been convinced that walking in it is selfish. There's a subtle but dangerous lie in many cultures, families, and even religious systems that says the more you erase yourself, the more spiritual you become. You are taught that to deny yourself means to neglect your dreams, your peace, your calling. But self-denial does not mean self-abandonment. It means denying your ego, not your essence. There's a difference between sacrifice and self-erasure, and far too many have confused the two. You were never called to be a doormat in the name of humility. You were called to dominate in the realm of your assignment. Purpose is not about ego. It's about obedience. When God gives you a vision, a burden, a fire that burns in your soul, He's not asking you to make it comfortable for others. He's asking you to carry it until it births transformation. But that process of carrying purpose demands focus, and focus looks like separation. It looks like saying no to distractions. It looks like protecting your time, guarding your energy, and refusing to be everywhere for everyone. It looks like a refined life, a disciplined schedule, and a serious commitment to what God has placed inside of you. That is not selfishness, that is stewardship. Too often, people equate self-prioritization with pride. But what if your refusal to focus is actually pride? What if continuing to live for others' approval while neglecting your assignment is not humility, but fear in disguise? Because true humility is agreeing with God's opinion of you. And if God called you, designed you, and placed a specific purpose in you, then denying that purpose is actually denying Him. You are not being humble when you shrink. You are being disobedient, there is a strategy in heaven that includes your full alignment. When you are in alignment with your purpose, things start to flow, clarity increases, discernment sharpens, opportunities begin to recognize you, favor begins to follow you. But none of that can happen when you are still negotiating with people who benefit from your confusion. You can't build destiny while still asking permission from people who don't understand your assignment. You can't birth vision in an environment that demands conformity. Purpose requires you to shift atmospheres, and sometimes it requires you to exit them completely. A vision requires cultivation. You don't just carry purpose, you must nurture it. A seed without soil dies. A dream without protection withers. If you had a physical child and neglected to feed it, protect it, and nurture it, people would say you're irresponsible. But how many of us are starving our purpose, leaving it vulnerable, exposing it to people who do not value it, all because we're afraid to look selfish? Purpose is strategic because it's not just about you. It's about everyone who is connected to your obedience. Your breakthrough becomes someone else's blueprint. Your healing becomes someone else's hope. Your alignment becomes someone else's confirmation. But none of that can happen if you keep diluting your calling to keep others comfortable. Playing small may win you temporary applause, but it forfeits eternal impact. And one day you'll have to answer not just for the sins you committed, but for the calling you ignored. People won't always understand your focus. They will call it isolation. They will say you're distant. They will say you've changed. And they're right. You have changed, you are evolving, you are refining. You are aligning with what heaven spoke over you before you were ever born. That requires a different version of you, a version that is no longer addicted to approval, no longer entangled in distraction, no longer settling for shallow relationships that don't support deep purpose. There are seasons when the most spiritual thing you can do is withdraw. Jesus withdrew from the crowds often not because he didn't love people, but because he loved his purpose enough to preserve it. The oil on your life is costly. The vision in your heart was given by heaven. And when heaven gives a vision, it also gives instructions, but only if you're listening. And you can't listen in chaos. You can't discern when your life is scattered. You need focus. You need clarity. You need intention. There are too many people living reactive lives, always responding to everyone else's needs while their own assignment collects dust in the corner of their soul. You were not born to merely survive. You were born to fulfill something specific, something eternal. And fulfilling that requires a decision. Will you live for distraction or will you live by design? Design demands structure. Design demands limits. Design demands clarity. You must decide who gets access to your time, who gets access to your mind, who gets to speak into your life not out of arrogance, but out of reverence for the calling you carry. The truth is, the more valuable the assignment, the more protected the environment must be. You wouldn't store treasure in an open field. Why do we store vision in careless conversations? Why do we let fragile dreams be handled by people who don't even value their own? Purpose is not selfish. It's strategic. It's the strategy of heaven manifesting through a human life fully surrendered. A life that says yes to calling, even when that yes requires you to walk away from comfort. A life that chooses mission over maintenance. A life that dares to be different, even if misunderstood. Because purpose does not need validation, it needs activation. And activation happens when you stop explaining yourself and start becoming yourself. There is a dangerous lie that has been passed down from generation to generation, masked in humility and disguised as sacrifice. That lie says, the more you deny yourself, the more righteous you are. But what they often mean by deny yourself is not what truth or scripture teaches. What they mean is abandon yourself, neglect yourself. Forget yourself entirely. Give until you're empty. Serve until you're broken. Stay silent even when your soul is screaming. But true humility never asks you to destroy your design. Real sacrifice is not about erasing yourself. It is about offering the fullness of yourself in the right season, to the right people, for the right purpose. You were not created to be depleted. You were created to be poured out, yes, but never at the expense of your spiritual, emotional, or mental wholeness. You are not a machine, nor are you a resource to be used until exhaustion. You are a vessel, a temple, a carrier of divine purpose, and yet many live as though their needs don't matter. They think denying their emotional pain is spiritual maturity. They think pushing past burnout is godliness. They think being needed is the same as being aligned. But being needed by others while you're empty inside is not a calling, it's a crisis waiting to happen. There are people who have made a lifestyle of spiritual exhaustion. They don't rest. They don't pause. They don't reflect. They live in a constant state of overextension, always giving, always available, always saying yes until they collapse under the pressure of what they were never built to sustain. And instead of questioning the system that led them there, they call it endurance. Instead of calling it imbalance, they call it faithfulness. But faithfulness is not fruitfulness if it kills your purpose in the process. Some of the most broken people are the ones who are always pouring. They are the encouragers who have no one to encourage them, the leaders who feel like they can never let their guard down, the givers who silently resent the fact that no one ever gives back. They have been taught to serve, but not taught to replenish. They know how to meet everyone else's needs, but have forgotten how to listen to their own. This is not virtuous, it is violent. It is a slow erosion of the soul, masked in noble language. But no amount of service justifies the neglect of your divine design. Jesus himself took time to rest. He withdrew from the crowd. He slept during storms. He retreated to the mountain. He understood that doing the will of the Father required rest as much as it required action. But in many spiritual circles, people have spiritualized burnout. They applaud you when you're constantly busy, constantly working, constantly performing. They give you titles, stages, and responsibilities, all while ignoring the weariness in your eyes. And you wear your exhaustion like a badge of honor, not realizing that the very thing killing you is being celebrated by those who benefit from your sacrifice. You are your first responsibility. Before you minister to others, you must learn to minister to yourself. Before you pour into others, you must sit long enough to be poured into. Before you lead, you must be led. Before you teach, you must be taught. There is a divine order to this. God never called you to skip yourself in the name of serving others. What good is it to save the world while losing your soul? What gain is there in being everyone's savior while your own spirit is sinking? So many people feel guilty for taking time for themselves. They feel wrong for saying no. They feel ashamed for setting boundaries. But guilt is not always an indicator of sin. Sometimes it's a signal that you've stepped out of a cycle of dysfunction. When you've been trained to neglect yourself, healing will feel like rebellion. But it's not rebellion, it's restoration. It's the moment your soul begins to realign with what it always knew to be true, that you matter too. Boundaries are not ungodly. Saying no is not unloving. Resting is not laziness. Healing is not weakness. These are not luxuries, they are necessities. Without them, you will eventually become a shell of the person you were meant to be. You may still function, you may still perform, but you will do so from a place of depletion instead of overflow. And there is a major difference between performing for people and operating from purpose. One wears you out, the other fuels your life. Neglect is never holy. Ignoring your health is not an act of worship. Starving your soul is not sacrifice. These are lies dressed up as religious discipline. They sound noble, but they are not sustainable. They sound spiritual, but they are not scriptural. You were not called to constantly break yourself for others. You were called to walk in wholeness, and from that wholeness you serve. From that wholeness you give. From that wholeness you lead. You cannot give what you don't have. You cannot teach what you haven't learned. You cannot heal what you have not acknowledged. Neglecting yourself also sends the wrong message to those watching your life. It teaches your children that self-worth is optional. It teaches your community that survival is a sign of strength. It teaches others that the price of greatness is pain without end. But what if your life could teach something different? What? If your life taught that purpose and peace are not enemies? That serving others doesn't mean abandoning yourself? That spiritual maturity includes knowing when to retreat, when to restore, when to say, I need help? In truth, you were never meant to carry it all. You were never called to be the answer to everyone's problems. You were called to obey your assignment, not be a martyr for other people's expectations. There is a freedom that comes when you finally give yourself permission to pause, to rest, to be human, to be honest, to sit with your soul and ask, am I truly living from purpose or am I just surviving out of habit? Because until you can answer that question with courage, you will continue to confuse self-destruction for devotion. There's a sacred order in how destiny unfolds, and that order does not begin with position, title, or platform. It begins with healing. Healing is the foundation of influence. Healing is the source of authentic power. Healing is what separates noise from authority, activity from anointing. Too many are trying to lead while still bleeding, trying to build while broken, trying to pour into others while ignoring their own soul's cry for restoration. Leadership is not simply about skill. It is about wholeness. Because when you lead from a healed place, your presence carries transformation. The world is full of voices, but not all voices carry weight. The weight of true leadership does not come from popularity, visibility, or influence. It comes from depth. And depth is only found through the process of inner restoration. The most powerful people are not those who have never been wounded. They are the ones who chose to confront their wounds, tend to them, and grow through them. The healed leader does not lead from ego or image. The healed leader leads from truth. That truth is forged in quiet places, sacred places, places no one sees but God. Healing is not a delay, it is preparation. There are divine assignments that cannot be fulfilled until your inner world aligns with your outer calling. Until your mind, emotions, and spirit are submitted to the process of wholeness, the weight of purpose will crush you rather than launch you. The timing of God is not dictated by urgency, but by readiness. And readiness does not come from hustle, it comes from healing. When God takes you through a season of stripping, of solitude, of silence, it is not punishment. It is construction. He is building within you the capacity to carry the very thing you've been praying for. Many people want the results of purpose without the refinement of pain. They want the reward without the responsibility. But the truth is, brokenness that is unaddressed becomes poison. It seeps into your relationships, your decisions, your leadership, and your communication. You begin to project your wounds onto others. You begin to seek validation instead of walking in conviction. You begin to demand loyalty without offering safety. Leadership that has not gone through healing will always end up being a mirror of dysfunction, not a reflection of divine purpose. You don't get to skip your healing journey and expect lasting impact. Yes, you may be gifted. Yes, you may be charismatic. Yes, you may know how to inspire people. But gifting without healing leads to manipulation. Anointing without character leads to collapse. Inspiration without integrity leads to burnout. When you are not healed, you use leadership to feed your insecurity rather than serve your assignment. You make people followers of your wounds, not disciples of truth. You start building monuments to your pain instead of movements toward purpose. But when you heal, everything shifts. You no longer perform to be seen, you operate from identity. You no longer fear rejection because your worth is no longer up for debate. You no longer manipulate outcomes because your trust is rooted in God's process, not people's applause. You lead with stillness. You lead with clarity. You lead with compassion that comes not from sympathy but from empathy. Because you know what it feels like to be broken, to be lost, to be confused. And now, on the other side, you are able to guide others with precision and humility. Healing births discernment. You begin to recognize patterns, avoid toxic cycles, and make decisions that protect your peace and your purpose. You stop saying yes to what drains you. You stop entertaining what distracts you. You no longer compromise your values just to be accepted. Healing produces maturity, and maturity strengthens leadership. It makes you stable in crisis, consistent under pressure, and trustworthy with influence. People can feel when you are whole. You don't have to announce it. Your energy carries it, your words reflect it. Your silence speaks it. Some of the most anointed leaders don't lead with a microphone, they lead with presence. Their healed spirit carries authority into every room they walk in. They don't have to strive. They don't have to dominate. They don't have to beg for attention. Their healed identity becomes the answer to confusion around them. They walk in rooms and atmospheres shift. Not because of hype, but because of the depth they carry. And that depth was not formed in crowds, but in caves. It was not developed in applause, but in obscurity. That is where God does his deepest work, in the shadows, when no one is watching, when you're wrestling, weeping, questioning, and still choosing to stay surrendered. When you commit to healing, you become dangerous to darkness. Because healed people don't live reactive lives. They live intentional ones. They are no longer triggered by every slight, every comment, every rejection. They are grounded, rooted, and steady. They become safe places for others to grow. They become mirrors showing others what's possible. Not because they're perfect, but because they're real. They are proof that restoration is not only possible, it is powerful. A healed leader knows how to honor the pain without becoming imprisoned by it. They use the lessons, not the labels. They remember the process. But they don't worship the wound. They testify without bleeding. They serve without striving. They lead without losing themselves. And in doing so, they create space for others to step into healing too. Because healing is not just personal, it's prophetic. It speaks life into others, it breaks cycles, it births courage. It breathes possibility into people who had given up hope. When you choose to heal, you break generational patterns. You interrupt legacies of silence, pain, and self-destruction. You become the first in your bloodline to say, "It ends with me." You lead not just by example, but by spirit. You walk into rooms carrying the weight of breakthroughs your ancestors never had the tools to reach. That kind of leadership does not come from ambition, it comes from surrender. From letting God remake you from the inside out. From letting him touch what you've tried to hide. From letting him rewire your thinking, restore your heart, and renew your mind. Healing gives you vision. Not just for others, but for yourself. You stop surviving and start building. You stop waiting for validation and start walking in confirmation. You start leading not from a place of fear, but from a place of fire. A fire that was ignited in the furnace of transformation. A fire that cannot be quenched by disappointment, betrayal, or delay. Because when you are healed, your soul becomes untouchable, your identity becomes unshakable, your leadership becomes undeniable, and your life becomes a living testimony of what God can do with a broken vessel made whole. You were never selfish for choosing yourself. You were never wrong for seeking peace. You were never rebellious for walking away from what suffocated your soul. You were simply waking up. Waking up to the truth that you cannot pour into others when your cup is empty. Waking up to the realization that purpose requires alignment, not approval. Waking up to the awareness that your life has a specific divine assignment that cannot be fulfilled through people-pleasing, self-neglect, or hiding in the shadows of others' expectations. This journey back to yourself is not an act of rebellion, it's an act of obedience. It's choosing to walk in the identity that heaven assigned you before your birth. It's honoring your calling enough to protect it. It's respecting your purpose enough to build boundaries around it. It's acknowledging that your healing is holy, your rest is sacred, and your growth is non-negotiable. When you stop apologizing for your clarity, you start walking in your authority. You were not made to live small. You were not created to live numb. You were not called to spend your days buried beneath the weight of guilt, fear, or the opinions of others. You were made to rise. You were made to lead. You were made to break cycles and shift atmospheres and leave footprints of purpose everywhere you go. But that only happens when you choose to wake up. When you stop shrinking, when you stop explaining, When you finally realize focusing on you isn't selfish, it's necessary, it's strategic, it's sacred. Because the world doesn't need another imitation. The world needs the real you. The healed you, the aligned you, the awakened you. And that journey begins the moment you decide to stop living for noise and start living for purpose.